Afternoon. Today, I'm going to read chapter 15 and the last chapter of the Bible and the Psyche, Individuation, Symbolism in the Old Testament by Edward F. Edinger. Good evening, James. Welcome. I'm just beginning the last chapter. I hope you enjoy it. So, before I begin, I want to mention that in the next, starting Tuesday, the new group that I created called the Wisdom Path Team, and I'm going to put their link on the YouTube channel, is going to be conducting at least 3 times a week, a global check-in about the coronavirus, where you'll be able to come on to a webinar with us and tell us about what's going on in your neighborhood, whether it's in the United States or in Saudi Arabia, wherever you are in the world. We'd like to hear the truth about what's really happening around the world with the coronavirus, and talk about how we're going to give support to others during this time. Just for the record, that little cough of mine is, I believe it's an allergy cough. I trust that it is. And so, excuse me, I don't think I have coronavirus right now. Hi, Art, welcome. And so I'll be making a further announcement about the global check-in, where we give everyone a chance to talk. Members of the Wisdom Path team, and especially Tim Holmes and I, will be present to talk about any questions that you have about what's going on in your mind or in your community, and let's get the truth out about how the coronavirus is affecting us around the world. I believe that we will begin about 11 a.m. U.S. Eastern time on Tuesday, and there will be a special link for that, so watch for that link. I'll be announcing it on Twitter and also on Facebook. And so let me just, this is my Twitter link if you happen to want to reach me on Twitter, but you can also reach me through the Wisdom Path team. And so it's a free session to discuss these issues around the world. And Daniel says, did you ever read Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious? Yes, that's volume 9-1 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And so, yes, indeed. But the purpose today, and in this particular video, is to read this last chapter. And so prior to this, I've read all other chapters, and so I will have read this entire book, The Bible and the Psyche, Individuation, Symbolism in the Old Testament by Edward F. Edinger. Chapter 15, Messiah, the Self-Realized, the Coming King. Throughout the Old Testament are many references to a coming king or anointed one who will deliver Israel from her enemies and establish a perpetual kingdom. The first clear reference to this figure is found in Genesis 49, 10 through 12. Quote, "The scepter shall not pass from Judah, nor the mace from between his feet, until he can come to whom it belongs, to whom the peoples shall render obedience. He ties up his young ass to a vine, to its stock the foal of his she-ass. He washes his coat in wine, his cloak in the blood of the grape. His eyes are cloudy with wine. I'm sorry, his eyes are cloudy red with wine, his teeth are white with milk, unquote. This passage has been understood concretely as a prophecy of a Judaic king who is to rule over the nations. More generally, it is considered to refer to the Messiah by both Jewish and Christian commentators. The theme of the theme of wine and milk finds a parallel in Joel 3:18. Quote, when that day comes, the mountains will run with new wine, and the hills flow with milk, and all the riverbeds of Judah will run with water. A fountain will spring from the house of Yahweh to water the wadi of acacias. Unquote. Washing garments in blood appears in Revelation 7:14. Quote, these are the people who have been through the great persecution, and because they have washed their robes white again in the blood of the Lamb, they now stand in front of God's throne and serve him day and night in his sanctuary. Unquote. The theme of red and white is reminiscent of the alchemical conjunctio between the red man and the white woman, Sol and Luna. The next passage, considered to refer to the Messiah, appears in Numbers 24:17 and following, in Balaam's prophecy. Quote, I see him, but not in the present. I behold him, but not close at hand. A star from Jacob takes the leadership. A scepter arises from Israel. It crushes the brows of Moab, the skulls of all the sons of Sheth. Unquote. The Qumran community applied this text to the interpreter of the law, and it was the source of the name of the last chief of the Zealot movement, Bar Kokhba, son of the star. The patristic writers made much of this passage, applying it to Christ's nativity star. In Deuteronomy 18:15, Moses announces Yahweh's promise to raise up for you a prophet like myself from among yourselves, from your own brothers. To him you must listen. This was understood to be a prophecy of the Messiah as the second Moses. The promise was the promise was repeated to David. Quote, Yahweh will make you great. Yahweh will make you a house. And when your days are ended and you are laid to rest with your ancestors, I will preserve the offspring of your body after you and make his sovereignty secure. I will be a father to him and be a son, and he a son to me. Your house and your sovereignty will always stand secure before me, and your throne be established forever. 2 Samuel 7:11 through 16. This promise was repeated in the Psalms. For instance, Psalm 132, quote, Yahweh swore to David and will remain true to his word. Quote, I promise that your own son shall succeed you on the throne, unquote. For Yahweh, this chosen Zion, desiring this to be his home, here I will stay forever. This is the home I have chosen. Here I will make a horn sprout for David. Here I will trim a lamp for my anointed, whose enemies I shall clothe in shame, while his crown bursts with flour. Unquote. These promises are the source of the term Son of David applied to the Messiah. The history of Israel soon made it clear that they could not be taken literally. Psalm 89 bemoans Yahweh's broken promise as taken concretely. Jeremiah postpones the promise to the future. Quote, see, the days are coming, it is Yahweh who speaks, when I will raise a virtuous branch for David, who will reign as true king and be wise, practicing honesty and integrity in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel dwell in confidence, and this is the name he will be called: Yahweh our integrity. Jeremiah 23, 5 and 6. Similarly, Ezekiel prophesies against the ill-fated Zedekiah, quote, "And thou, profane, wicked prince of Israel, whose day is come, when iniquity shall have an end, thus saith the Lord God, remove the diadem and take off the crown. This shall not be the same. Exalt him that is low and abase him that is high. I will overturn it, and it shall be no more until he come whose right it is, and I will give it to him." Ezekiel 21, 25 through 27. He whose right it is echoes the words of Genesis 49:10, and like the latter has been understood as a messianic prophecy. As F. Bruce puts it, quote, "It might have been thought at one time that the establishment of the Davidic monarchy exhausted the terms of the promise in Judah's blessing. Again, with the fall of that monarchy, it might have been thought that the promise had been annulled. But Ezekiel declares that the prophecy neither found its ultimate fulfillment in the rise of David's house, nor met its final frustration in the ruin of that house. Another David, a true shepherd of Israel, is yet to come, the one to whom the sovereignty belongs by right. And in him all the promises made to Judah's tribe and David's house will be perfectly satisfied." Unquote. Several psalms speak explicitly of a future ideal king, an anointed one who will rule forever. Quote, "Like sun and moon, he will endure age after age. Welcome is rain that falls on the pasture and showers to thirsty soil. In his days, virtue will flourish, a universal peace till the moon is no more. His empire shall stretch from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth." Psalm 72, 5 through 8. He will carry supreme authority. Yahweh tells him, quote, "Sit at my right hand, and I will make your enemies a footstool for you." Psalm 110, 1. His absolute sovereignty is described most fully in Psalm 2. Quote, Why this uproar among the nations? Why this impotent muttering of pagans? Kings on earth rising in revolt, princes plotting against Yahweh and his anointed. Now let us break their fetters. Now let us throw off their yoke. The one whose throne is in heaven sits laughing. Yahweh derides them. Then angrily he addresses them. In a rage he strikes them with panic. This is my king installed by me on Zion, my holy mountain. Let me proclaim Yahweh's decree. He has told me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask and I will give you the nations for your heritage and the ends of the earth for your domain. With iron scepter you will break them, shatter them like potter's ware. So now, you kings, learn wisdom. Earthly rulers, be warned. Serve Yahweh, fear him. Tremble and kiss his feet, or he will be angry and you will perish, for his anger is very quick to blaze. Happy all who take shelter in him. The phrase, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee," verse 7, establishes the Messiah as son of Yahweh. Other passages call him son of David and later son of man. This double parentage suggests that the self-consciously realized Messiah This double parentage suggests that the self-consciously realized Messiah is begotten by both the original self and the ego. The same twofold symbolism occurs in alchemy, where the philosopher's stone is described both as the gift of God and also as the son of the philosophers. This is the product of the efforts of the alchemists. the day of Yahweh. In the writings of the prophets, the imagery of a coming Messiah is overlapped with the idea of a last day, the day of the Lord, in which divine judgment will be meted out to the sinful world. Many of these prophetic passages refer primarily to the coming invasions of Israel and Judah by Assyria and Babylon. However, they have taken on or had projected into them a secondary eschatological meaning. Isaiah exclaims, quote, "Howl, for the day of Yahweh is near, bringing devastation from Shaddai. At this, every arm falls limp. The heart of each man fails him. They are terrified, pangs and pains seize them. They writhe like a woman in labor. They look at one another with feverish faces. The day of Yahweh is coming, merciless and wrath and fierce anger, to reduce the earth to desert and root out the sinners from it. For the stars of the sky and Orion shall not let their light shine. The sun shall be dark when it rises, and the moon shall shed her light. I will punish the world for its evil doing, and the wicked for their crime, to put an end to the pride of arrogant men and humble the pride of the despots." Isaiah 13, 6 through 11. Zephaniah sounds the same thing. Quote, "The great day of Yahweh is near, and coming with all speed. How bitter the sound of the day of Yahweh, the day when the warrior shouts his cry of war, a day of wrath that day, a day of distress and agony, a day of a day of ruin and of devastation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of cloud and blackness, a day of trumpet blast and battle cry against fortified town and high corner tower. I am going to bring such distress on men that they will grope like the blind, because they have sinned against Yahweh. Their blood will be scattered like dust, their corpses like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will have any power to save them. On the day of the anger of Yahweh, in the fire of his jealousy, all the earth will be consumed. For he means to destroy, yes, to make an end of all the inhabitants of the earth." Zephaniah 1, 14 to 18. The terrible image of unmitigated destruction is finally softened in Zechariah with a glimpse of the messianic age, which will follow the day of Yahweh's wrath. Quote, "When that day comes, there will be no more cold nor no more frost. It will be a day of wonder. Yahweh knows it, with no alternation of day and night. In the evening, it will be light. When that day comes, running waters will issue from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea, half of them to the western sea. They will flow summer and winter, and Yahweh will be king of the whole world." Zechariah 14, 6 through 9. Psychologically, the day of Yahweh is a particular example of the more general archetypal image of the Last Judgment, which is found in many religions, usually projected into the afterlife or into an eschatological future. This image refers to a major encounter between the ego and the self, in which the former experiences a devastating insight into its defects, and unacknowledged reality. It is the experience of being seen by an other, often symbolized by the eye of God. The image of widespread destruction refers to those aspects of the personality which are not grounded in psychic reality and therefore cannot survive transpersonal scrutiny. If in this encounter the ego holds It is followed by an enlargement of personality. Jung describes the experience in these words, quote, when a summit of life is reached, when the bud unfolds and from the lesser the greater emerges, then, as Nietzsche says, one becomes two, and the greater figure, which one always was, but which remained invisible, appears to the lesser personality with the force of a revelation. He who is truly and hopelessly little will always drag the revelation of the great down to the level of his littleness, and will never understand that the day of judgment for his littleness has dawned. But the man who is inwardly great will know that the long expected friend of his soul, the immortal one, has now really come to lead captivity captive. Ephesians 4:8. That is, to seize hold of him by whom this immortal had always been confined and held prisoner, and to make his life flow into that greater life, a moment of deadliest peril. Just see how much further we have to go. Oh, this. Guess we still have a few pages. Okay, I'm not going to finish today because this is too long. But what I will do is, let's see. Okay, I'll read the next segment. The Suffering Servant of Yahweh. While some Messiah texts picture the Messiah as an invincible king, others represent him as a humble suffering servant. For instance, Psalm 22, quote, my God, why have you deserted me? How far from saving me the words I groan? I call all day, my God, but you never answer. All night long I call and cannot rest. Yet here I am, now more worm than man, scorn of mankind, just of the people. All who see me jeer at me. They toss their heads and sneer. He relied on Yahweh, let Yahweh save him. If Yahweh is his friend, let him rescue him. I am like water draining away, my bones are all disjointed. My heart is like wax, melting inside me. My palate is drier than a potsherd. My tongue is stuck to my jaw. A pack of dogs surrounds me. A gang of villains closes me in. They tie me hand and foot and leave me lying in the dust of death. I can count every one of my bones, and there they glare at me, gloating. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothes. Psalms 22, 1 through 18. These words are considered to be spoken by the Messiah. The first line was uttered by Christ on the cross, and some think he recited the entire psalm on that occasion. The other major text is the so-called fourth song of the servant of Yahweh, found in Isaiah. Quote, see, my servant will prosper. He shall be lifted up, exalted, rise to great heights. Who could believe that we have heard, and to whom has the power of Yahweh been revealed? Like a sapling, he grew up in front of us, like a root in arid ground. Without beauty, without majesty, we saw him. No looks to attract our eyes. A thing despised and rejected by man. A man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. A man to make people screen their faces. He was despised, and we took no account of him. And yet ours were the sufferings he bore, ours the sorrows he carried. But we thought of him as someone punished, struck by God and brought low. Yet he was pierced through our faults, crushed for our sins. On him lies a punishment that brings us peace, and through his wounds we are healed. Yahweh has been pleased to crush him with suffering. If he offers his life in atonement, he shall see his heirs. He shall have a long life, and through him what Yahweh wishes will be done. His soul's anguish over, he shall see the light and be content. By his suffering shall my servant justify many, taking their faults on himself. Hence I will grant whole hordes for his tribute. He shall divide the spoil with the mighty, for surrendering himself to death and letting himself be taken for a sinner, while he was bearing the faults of many and praying all the time for sinners. Isaiah 52, 13 to 53. Isaiah 52, 13 to Isaiah 53, 12. The servant of Yahweh then described was first introduced in Isaiah 42, 1, 4. Quote, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. I have endowed him with my spirit, that he may bring true justice to the nations. He does not cry out or shout aloud, or make his voice heard in the streets. He does not break the crushed reed, nor quench the wavering flame. Faithfully he brings true justice. He will neither waver nor be crushed until true justice is established on earth, for the islands are awaiting his law." Unquote. The phrase, I have endowed him with my spirit, unquote, indicates the servant is an anointed one, thus in some sense a Messiah. In the New Testament, this passage is applied to Christ, who was anointed by the Holy Spirit at his baptism. F.F. Bruce has pointed out that members of the Qumran community were conscious of a vocation to fulfill the commission of the servant of Yahweh. He cites a passage in the tractate Sanhedrin of the Babylonian Talmud, quote, "The Messiah, what is his name? Our rabbis say the leper of the house of Rabbi, house of learning, is his name. As it is said, surely he has borne our sickness and carried our pains. Yet we esteemed him a leper, smitten by God and afflicted." Just a moment. He also quotes a hymn of the poet Eleazar ben Khalil, variously dated from the late 7th to the 10th century AD, which is included in the additional prayers for the Day of Atonement. Quote, "Our righteous Messiah had departed from us. We are horror-stricken, and there is none to justify us. Our iniquities and the yoke of our transgressions he carries and is wounded for our transgressions. He bears on his shoulder our sins to find pardon for our iniquities. May we be healed by his stripes." Unquote. The suffering servant is a personification of redeeming consciousness. He takes on himself the voluntary role of the scapegoat. As part of the great annual ritual of atonement, a scapegoat was loaded with the sins of the community and sent into the wilderness. Leviticus 16, 20 to 22. The suffering servant of Yahweh performs a similar function, since he was crushed for our sins, and through his wounds we are healed. This figure emerges in the process of individuation as an image of consciousness of wholeness. Although experienced by the ego must not identify with it. It is rather a manifestation of the self consciously realized, which brings with it a reconciliation of the opposites, redemption. A dream of a young man illustrates this figure. Quote, I dreamed I saw a modern Christ figure. He was traveling in a bus with a group of his disciples. Then I sensed there was a danger. He was going to be betrayed. It happened, and the bus rocked with violence. He was set upon and subdued. I looked in and saw that they had apparently tied ropes to each of his hands and feet and had pulled him tight, spread eagled in four directions. I knew they would kill him that way. Then it appeared when I looked at him more closely that he was not tied by the hands, but was grasping with each hand a wooden bar attached to the rope. He was cooperating in his own death. At the end of the dream came an image of a magnetic field of force, which looked like this drawing. And so here's the drawing. Unquote. This dream marked a life transition and change in vocation. It represents a new energy configuration forming at the center of the psyche, brought about by a willing sacrifice of the self. The theme of voluntary suffering appears in a remarkable passage of a letter by Jung. He writes to an unknown recipient, quote, I consciously and intentionally made my life miserable because I wanted God to be alive and free from the suffering man has put on him by loving his own reason more than God's secret intentions. Jung is here speaking out of the suffering servant archetype. A willing acceptance of suffering is an aspect of consciousness of wholeness, since it includes a painful awareness of the opposites. Jung puts it starkly, quote, without the experience of the opposites, there is no experience of wholeness, and hence no inner approach to the sacred figures. Although insight into the problem of opposites is absolutely imperative, there are very few people who can stand it in practice. The reality of evil and its incompatibility with good cleave the opposites asunder and lead inexorably to the crucifixion and suspension of everything that lives. Since the soul is by nature Christian, this result is bound to come as infallibly as it did in the life of Jesus. We all have to be crucified with Christ, i.e., suspended in a moral suffering equivalent to a veritable crucifixion. Now, let me see how much more. Okay, I will keep going. There's 5 more pages. The Son of Man. We encounter the term Son of Man for the first time in the Old Testament in Ezekiel. At the time of his great mandala vision, Ezekiel is addressed by Yahweh as Son of Man, Ezekiel 2:1, presumably to indicate that he is a son of the man on the throne in the vision. It shows up again in a vision of Daniel, this time clearly identified as the Messiah. Quote, I gazed into the visions of the night, and I saw coming in the clouds of heaven one like a son of man. He came to the one of great age and was led into his presence. On him was conferred sovereignty, glory, and kingship. And men of all peoples, nations, and languages became his servants. His sovereignty is an eternal sovereignty, which shall never pass away, nor will his empire ever be destroyed. Daniel 7:13 and 14. The same term is used in the book of Enoch, which gives an extensive description of the messianic Son of Man. Quote, "And in that place I saw the fountain of righteousness, which was inexhaustible, and around it were many fountains of wisdom, and all the thirsty drank of them, and were filled with wisdom. And their dwellings were with the righteous and holy and elect. And at that hour that Son of Man was named, in the presence of the Lord of spirits, and in his name before the head of days, yea, before the sun and the signs were created, before the stars of the heavens were made. His name was named before the Lord of spirits. He shall be a staff to the righteous, whereon to stay themselves and not fall, and he shall be the light of the Gentiles, and the hope of those who are troubled in heart. All who dwell on earth shall fall down and worship before him, and will praise and bless and celebrate with song the Lord of spirits. And for this reason hath he been chosen and hidden before him, before the creation of the world and forevermore." Enoch 48, 1-6. Jung comments on Enoch's vision, noting that, quote, "When Yahweh addressed Ezekiel as Son of Man, this was no more at first than a dark and enigmatic hint, but now it becomes clear the man of Enoch is not only the recipient of divine revelation, but is at the same time a participant in the divine drama, as though he were at least one of the sons of God himself. This can only be taken as meaning that in the same measure as God sets out to become man, man is immersed in the pleromatic process. He becomes, as it were, baptized in it, and is made to participate in the divine quaternity, i.e., is crucified with Christ," unquote. Man's being, quote, "made to participate in the divine quaternity," unquote, refers to Ezekiel's fourfold vision of the divine chariot, Ezekiel 1, 4, and following, and to Enoch's vision of the four presences of angels who stood before the Lord of spirits, Enoch 40, 1 and following. Thus, to the extent one participates in the divine quaternity, which is the essence of individuation, one is incarnating the archetype of the Son of Man. Christ repeatedly identified himself with the Son of Man, and on that evidence alone becomes a symbol of the self. The term Son of Man is symbolically analogous to the alchemical term Filius Philosophorum, son of the philosophers, which is a synonym for the philosopher's stone. The phrase son of the philosophers indicates that the philosopher's stone is a product of the efforts of the alchemists. Likewise, Son of Man implies that the Messiah, self, is in part created by the ego. Next section, one more section. The Messianic Age. The coming of the Messiah will inaugurate an ideal age of peace and piety. It is alluded to in the Old Testament and developed more fully in the legends. In that day, quote, the wolf lives with the lamb, the panther lies down with the kid. Calf and lion cub feed together with a little boy to lead them. The cow and the bear make friends, their young lie down together. The lion eats straw like the ox. The infant plays over the cobra's hole into the viper's lair. The young child puts his hand, they do not hurt, no harm, on all my holy mountain, for the country is filled with the knowledge of Yahweh, as the waters swell the earth. Isaiah 11, 6 through 9. According to Hosea, quote, when that day comes, I will make a treaty on her behalf with the wild animals, with the birds of heaven and the creeping things of the earth. I will break bow, sword, and battle in the country, and make her peace secure. I will betroth you to myself forever, betroth you with integrity and justice, with tenderness and love. I will betroth you to myself with faithfulness, and you will come to know Yahweh. Hosea 2, 18 to 20. And Micah, quote, they will hammer their swords into plowshares, their spears into sickles. Nation will not lift sword against nation. There will be no more training for war. Each man will sit under his vine and his fig tree, with no one to trouble him. Micah 4, 3 and 4. Hello, Marie. Welcome. Almost done. In the Messianic age, the opposites will be reconciled. The conflicts between animals, between man and animals, between man, and between man and God will be resolved. This describes a state of totality in which the divisions of the psyche have been harmonized by consciousness of the whole. According to legend, there will be a great messianic banquet at which the flesh of Behemoth and Leviathan will be eaten and the Garden of Eden state will be restored. Quote, in that hour, the Holy One, blessed be he, will set table and slaughter Behemoth and Leviathan and prepare a great banquet for the pious. And he will seat each one of them according to his honor. And the Holy One, blessed be he, will bring them wine that was preserved in its grapes since the 6 days of creation. And he fulfills the wishes of the pious, rises from the throne of glory, and sits with them. And he brings all the fine things of the Garden of Eden. Unquote. The primordial deity, Behemoth and Leviathan, will be humanized and transformed as it is assimilated by consciousness. This restores the original state of wholeness, Garden of Eden, on a new conscious level. Then a new Torah will be taught, and the dissociation between heaven and hell will be healed. Quote, and the Holy One, blessed be he, will expound to them the meanings of a new Torah, which he will give them through the Messiah. In that hour of Holy One, in that hour, the Holy One, blessed be he, takes the keys of Gehenna, and in front of all the pious brings them to Michael and Gabriel, and says to them, go and open the gates of Gehenna, and bring them up from Gehenna. And Gabriel and Michael stand over them, the wicked, in that hour, and wash them, and anoint them with oil, and heal them of the wounds of Gehenna, and clothe them in the beautiful and good garments, and take them by their hand and bring them before the Holy One. Blessed be he. Unquote. The final state of wholeness is expressed in the image of the New Jerusalem. Patai writes, quote, in the Talmud and Midrash, the heavenly Jerusalem is a standard agogic notion presented in great detail and in many variants. In them, the undying love of the Jewish people for Jerusalem, the holy city, the city of the temple, and the royal seat of David, finds eloquent expression in limitless flights of fancy, describing the glories of the future Jerusalem in the days of the Messiah. This messianic Jerusalem, which will descend in its entirety from heaven, will comprise 1,000 towers, fortresses, street corners, pools, and cisterns, It will extend as far as Damascus. Its height will increase by miles. Its gates will be huge precious stones. Jewels and pearls will be scattered all over its streets and environs like pebbles, and its radiance will light the whole world and will rise up to God's throne of glory. Unquote. In the spirit of this collective Jewish fantasy is the great mandala vision of the New Jerusalem recorded in Revelation. Quote, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had disappeared now, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city and the New Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven, as beautiful as a bride all dressed for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice call from the throne, 'You see this city? Here God lives among men. He will make his home among them. They shall be his people, and he will be their God.' In the Spirit, he took me to the top of an enormous high mountain and showed me Jerusalem, the holy city, coming down from God out of heaven. It had all the radiant glory of God and glittered like some precious jewel of crystal clear diamond. The walls of it were of great height and had 12 gates. At each of the 12 gates there was an angel, and over the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. On the east there were 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. The city walls stood in 12 foundation. The city walls stood on 12 foundation stones, each one of which bore the name of one of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The angel that was speaking to me was carrying a gold measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and wall. The plan of the city is perfectly square, its length the same as its breadth. He measured the city with his rod, and it was 12,000 furlongs in length, in breadth, and equal in height. He measured its wall, and this was 144 cubits high. The angel was using the ordinary cubit. The wall was built of diamond, and the city of pure gold, like polished glass. The foundations of the city wall were faced with all kinds of precious stone, the first with diamonds, the second with lapis lazuli, the third with turquoise, the fourth with crystal, the fifth agate, the sixth ruby, the seventh gold quartz, the eighth malachite, the ninth topaz, the 10th emerald, the 11th sapphire, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls, each gate being made of a single pearl, and the main street of the city was pure gold, transparent as glass. I saw that there was no temple in the city, since the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb were themselves the temple, and the city did not need the sun or the moon for light, since it was lit by the radiant glory of God. Revelation 21, 1 through 23. This grand image of totality is a fitting conclusion to our survey of individuation symbolism in the Old Testament. Jung interprets it as follows, quote, "The city is Sophia, who was with God before time began, and at the end of time will be reunited with God through the sacred marriage. As a feminine being, she coincides with the earth, from which, so as Church Father tells us, Christ was born, and hence with the quaternity of the 4 living creatures in whom God manifests himself in Ezekiel. In the same way that Sophia signifies God's self-reflection, the 4 seraphim represent God's consciousness with its 4 functional aspects. The many perceiving eyes, Ezekiel 1, 18, which are concentrated in the four wheels, point in the same direction. They represent a fourfold synthesis of unconscious luminosities, corresponding to the tetrameria of the lapis philosophorum, of which the description of the heavenly city reminds us, every sparkle with precious gems, crystal, and glass, in complete accordance with Ezekiel's vision of God. And just as the Hieroskamos unites Yahweh with Sophia, Shekinah in the Kabbalah, thus restoring the original pleromatic state, so the parallel description of God and city points to their common nature. They are originally one, a single hermaphroditic being, an archetype of the greatest universality. So I've been reading, that quote comes from Answer to Job, Psychology and Religion 11, paragraph 727. And so that is the completion of the Bible and the Psyche, individuation, symbolism in the Old Testament. Edward F. Edinger is the author. And this is Answer to Job by C.G. Jung, with a foreword by Sono Shamdasani, who was the editor of the Red Book, just for your information. So I'm glad everybody is here. Welcome. Thank you for coming. So I have completed this reading of the Bible and the Psyche. You can find it entirely on this channel. I will highlight the playlist at some point in the next day or so. Meanwhile, the way the YouTube channel is going to be handled for the foreseeable future because of the coronavirus, we will be doing three different things. We are going to have at least a 3-day-a-week check-in where people from around the world can contact us, and members of my Wisdom Path team will be available to answer questions, and we will also be interested in knowing what's going on in your countries, especially if you're outside the United States, because our news media, unfortunately, rarely reports on countries outside of the United States. And I think we need to understand what's happening around the world to understand what our news means. Obviously, the companies that have agreed to build ventilators are going to have a big business, because there will be ventilators needed in every country, and there will be masks needed for healthcare workers in every country. And so this is going to be an important time. And Miles, I'm glad to see you here, because I'm hoping you're going to join in on this. We are going to have a global check-in. The first one, I think, will be Tuesday at 11 a.m. And I will be adding you to the panel. And so we're urging people from around the world to check in and tell us the story of what's going on in your place, or what's going on with your family, or tell us your grief if one of your loved ones is lost in this crisis that we're having on a global basis. We want to hear it all. And so it will be a method of balancing our psyches. We are not mental health professionals, but we are experienced individuals who probably can help in some way, short of having to go to a mental health professional. I know that the mental health professionals I know around the United States particularly are overwhelmed, and we're only at the beginning of this problem. So we hope that you will tell your friends, and if you check on the the link that's at the top of this chat for wisdompath.team, you'll be able to find out who's getting involved and how we're participating. And then besides that, which at the moment, Tim Holmes and I, who are the founders of the Wisdom Path team, are going to be, at least the two of us will be available on each of these 3 days a week. Then on Mondays, we will be having our normal Monday evening reading group, where I will attempt to continue to do a teaching, but also we will be trying to accommodate others in other parts of the world that can't reach the 11 a.m. Eastern time for the global check-in. So we'll be doing more check-ins on Monday evening. And of course, the advanced reading group, we are continuing on, finishing with volume 15 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. So if you have any questions or comments, please do write skip.conover@gmail.com. And if you want to participate in the mentoring team, please also write me for that purpose. So I'm hoping that Marie and Miles will also join us. And so anyway, that's the end of this session and the end of my reading of the Bible and the Psyche by Edward F. Edinger.